Hi, in this screencast, in the previous screencast we talked about PHP and how to set up PHP and the server. Let's make sure our server is running. Started the Apache web server. We don't need MySQL right now because we're just going to run our application, write programs in PHP and see how they work. So I'm just going to start Apache first, and then as I told you, I'm going to use Aptana as my development environment. Aptana is very good for backend development, although you can use NetBeans or Eclipse as well, but I prefer Aptana. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new project, new PHP project. Say let's call this project as screencast, because we are using it to develop for our screencast. And then I'm going to say finish. I'm going to change my default location because I don't want my default location to be over here. As I told you that whenever you want to run your server, you have to store your files in a specific folder. Now that specific folder actually comes up is based on your directory. So I installed, or I unzipped my portable server in my E drive, and inside a folder called XAMPP. So all my PHP files, in order to be run from my server, has to be stored in this root directory called htdocs. So I have to store everything inside over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change in Aptana, I'm going to change my location. I'm going to browse it to my computer, to the E drive, to my I'm going to just go back, XAMPP, htdocs. Inside htdocs I want to make a new folder where I want to start this. Let's say I'm going to call that folder the same as my screencast. I'm going to save that as my rename it. I'm going to store everything inside this folder. So I have this XAMPP, htdocs, screencast. So this is the folder I want to be the home. Okay, so I'm going to say finish, and that set up my server over here. That set up my directory that I'm going to work with. Next, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to create a new file which is going to be a PHP file within my screencast folder, and let's call that file index.php. I told you that if I call my file index, that means instead of typing the name of the file, I can just say localhost / screencast, and it will open this file by default. If you want to name it others, it depends upon how many files in the project you need to have. Okay, I should have said finish because I don't want to set up something. I don't want to use a template. I just want to say finish. Now this is a blank file that I have right now. Let's start with writing our first PHP program. Now we already did that in the previous screencast, but I didn't explain it to you how to do that. Whenever you want to write a PHP code, your code has to be between these delimiters. Delimiters is like the block enclosure where you want to write your PHP code. So if you want to write a PHP code, it should be written always between these. It's like an opening and closing bracket for your PHP. So if it's not written in this, your web server, your application server will not compile it. So it has to be written between these. It starts with a less than sign, a question mark, and the term PHP, and it closes with a question mark and a greater than sign. So this is like your brackets where you need to write your, this is the enclosure where you need to write your PHP code. Now let's learn about the first statement. We although saw that statement, and that is called an echo. Now echo was actually a command which is used to display something to the output. You remember when we talked about JavaScript, when you want to show something on the desktop, we use different commands for it. We used console.log, but that doesn't appear on your browser, but appeared in a special tab down in your development tools called console. If you want to display something on the browser itself, we used something called document.write. Now echo is exactly similar to document.write. That means it adds that item onto your page. So I'm going to say echo, and as we did, this is my first PHP program. Okay, so I'm going to display this message on my screen, on my browser window. So whenever someone comes to this page, I'm going to display this message, echo, this is my first PHP program. Okay, so that's simple. Instead of writing document.write, I'm using echo because PHP uses echo to display something, display an output. Okay, so I'm going to save this now. I'm going to go back to my browser and I'm going to test that. So over here I want to remove this previous test that we did earlier. In this case, I'm going to talk about the screencast project I created. So I'm going to say screencast, and you can see instead of I didn't type the index.php, right? So it's the same. As well, it's the default. So even if I type that and don't, it will be the same. So you can see this is my first PHP program. Now I'm going to show you something. Let's see the source code of this. So I'm going to say view page source. Okay, I'm going to not say that. I'm going to say inspect element. Yeah, that's much better. So you can see that this is the source code that I'm having. You see a lot of things over here, but the most important part is you see it's HTML. It's not PHP, it's HTML. So that was what I was talking about in the previous screencast. Even if you write your PHP code, you will not see your PHP code in your browser because your browser doesn't understand PHP code. It understands only HTML. So whenever you write your PHP code, your web server compiles it into an HTML file which has these, you see a lot of dummy items as well. This is added by your environment. Because I'm using Aptana, Aptana is the one that creates all these specific tags for it, so it can be compiled. So when it goes, it just takes my PHP code, runs it to the application server. The application server outputs this HTML page, and that is what is sent to my browser, and that is what we are seeing over here. So anytime you will never ever see the PHP code that is coming over here. Okay, so your browser understands only HTML. That's why we need an application server. If you don't have an application server, we cannot actually run this PHP code because it's a program. As I told you, it's like a normal program like C, C++ or Java, which needs a compiler to actually run it. So that's the job of the compiler is now done by this XAMPP application server. Okay, I hope that is clear right now, so that we're not going to go back to that point. So we understood that why do we need an application server. So I'm going to close that. So this is how we start writing. So we now concentrate only on writing our programs. So over here, this is my first program. As I told you, every time you need to write your PHP code, it should start and end with this delimiters, which is start with this and end with this, and every code written with inside of this code is compiled into HTML, is considered as your PHP, will be read by your development server and then returned back as HTML code. So the first command that we learned today from PHP is echo. Echo is like displaying an output on the screen. So whatever you write within echo will be displayed onto your screen, and that's as simple. You just say echo, you use quotations to write your message, and that's simple. Okay, now this is the first concept, which is how to write your program and how to use the echo statement. Now another important concept that we need to see, writing comments is just double backslash as we do with another programming languages. I'm going to say double backslash and say the first concept that we are going to see today is variables. Now what are variables? We already know about that. We just talked about this. Any named location onto your computer that the program creates is called a variable. So that means we can store some values inside it. We saw that JavaScript is a weakly typed language. Weakly typed in the sense variables do not have a data type. In JavaScript we use var keyword for any data type, any variable that you want to create. So suppose I'm going to create a variable a, I'll say var a equal to some value, and the data type of that a, that variable, is based on whatever item I'm storing in it. If I say a equal to 1, the data type of a becomes an integer. If I say a equal to 1.5, the data type of a becomes double, all float. If I say a equal to quotation hello, a becomes a string, and so on. If I say a equal to true, then it becomes a Boolean variable. So the data type depends upon the value that I stored inside it. Similar to that, PHP is also the same. It doesn't have any data types, and the data type of the variable depends upon the value that we store inside it. So what I'm going to say, create a variable. Creating a variable in PHP is a little different than JavaScript. any variable name in PHP always starts with the dollar sign. So I'm going to say dollar and then the name of the variable. Suppose the name of my variable is var, or let's not use var. I'm going to say first, dollar first equal to some value. So I'm going to say 12. So now I have a variable whose name is first and the value is assigned as 12. Okay, you can see a small difference between JavaScript and PHP over here. In JavaScript, we need to declare a variable before actually using it. That means we have to have a var variable name and then use it to assign values later on. In PHP, it's not the case. There is no declaration. You just start using your variables, and the value of that variable is based upon the first time you actually initialized it. So there is nothing like dollar first and so there's nothing like this. So we need to have like initialize it to some value in the beginning, and then we can use it later on. So here I created a variable whose type is an integer. Let's say I'm going to create a variable called double. I'm going to say int over here. Okay, integer, say double, and I'm going to say 3.5, and I'm going to say the dollar, let's say string. In that case it would be hello world. You can use single quotations or double quotations for strings. There is a slight difference, but I'm going to talk about that difference later in the screencasts, and later screencasts, not in this one, in some other one. And then also we have dollar, let's say boolean, which can be true or false. Because usually whenever you're using, you have to use a capital one, so I'm going to use capital so that to tell that it's a constant, so it's a boolean value. Okay, so these are the different types of variables, and these are the different types of data that I can store in these variables. I can store an integer, a double or a float, a string, or even boolean. Okay, so that's it. That's how you create variables in PHP. What else do we need to know? PHP supports operators as any other language. You have many different types of operators. You have your plus, minus, multiply, divide, and your modulus operator. And then you have conditional operators like or, and not. Apart from that, PHP also supports words instead of just operators. So that means I can use and. We're going to talk about this later in the next screencast. We have and or, and we can also use not. Okay, so no, we cannot use not. So this and or. Okay. Next is okay. Let's stop over here and then start in the next screencast about loops and conditions. Now, before we go on to the next screencast, I want to show you something else. These are variables, right? We can also create functions similar way in PHP. Now, how do we do that? In functions, I'm going to say functions, and we'll just create the function. We just write about the function over here. So we say function, and then the name of the function. So I'm going to say test, take brackets. You can have parameters inside the brackets, and inside that function I'm going to, let's say, echo again, I am inside a function. Okay, and I'm going to call that function over here, so test, right? And then let's go back to our test page. I'm going to refresh it. You can see that this is my first program. I am inside a function. Okay, so there's no breaking point over here because I'm not using anything to break that line. Okay, so this is how you write functions. You can also return values from a function. We're going to see that again in a later program, but this is how you write functions. So functions are similar to in JavaScript. We also use the function keyword, name of the function, brackets, and inside the brackets we can have parameters. And as you know, there's no data type, so we can just call parameters like this, $a, comma, $b, and that's it. So if I want to say I'm going to use that to sum up two values, I'm going to say $result equal to $a plus $b, and I'm going to echo the result, which is dollar result. Okay, dollar result. I'm going to remove this first line of code just to see the result. Okay, so when I'm going to call test, I'm going to pass on my two values, which is, let's say, 5 and 10. This is my $a and $b, and then I'm going to go back to my page again. This time you can see 15 because that's how my function is working over here. Similarly, instead of doing that, I can just return the value, return $result, and over here I want to say result equal to test 5, 10, and then I can simply echo $result. So this is how you write a function, a complete function. I missed the semicolon over here. So this is how you write a complete function. You have a function, the keyword, the name of the function, which is test. We can have any number of parameters. I'm using 2 parameters over here. Now these 2 parameters are variables, and I don't need to use the var keyword. I just simply use $a and $b, and then inside that function I have $result equal to $a plus $b. I'm just adding these 2 numbers to get my result, and then using the return keyword to return the result. And then inside the next line, I'm calling that function with 2 values, 5 and 10, and then storing that result inside this $s, and then echoing out the result. So this is how everything is actually working for me. Okay, let's go back and test it. Should be same, because that's what I did. Now suppose I want to concatenate. You remember that when we want to concatenate 2 strings, or even a string and a variable name, we in JavaScript we use the sign plus. In PHP it's different. We don't use the sign plus, we use a period or a dot. Okay, so if I want to say echo the result is, and the result is, so if I want to combine that, these 2, I have to use this dot to combine, to concatenate to a string, 2 strings, or a string or a variable. I use a dot. Okay, so it's a little different from JavaScript. In JavaScript you use the plus sign, in PHP we use a dot. Okay, that's how we do that. And then I'm going to go back and refresh the page, so you can see the result is 15. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much how we do that. Now strings, usually in JavaScript, strings have a lot of functions. Sorry, in PHP strings have a lot of functions, as we saw in PHP, as we saw in JavaScript. So when slides, usually we have a list of these functions. We have a list of a lot of functions that works on string. We have the length of the string. We have substring of the string. Now the substring actually works with giving you the starting point and the length of the string. We have some that works with arrays. We're going to discuss that later on once we discuss arrays. We have reversing of a string. We can convert a string from uppercase, a string to uppercase, and string to lowercase, and we can also count the occurrence of a substring within a given string using substring count. So there are many functions. These are some few of them which you can actually consider learning about, but there are a lot of them available. As I told you, you can use the resource that I showed you earlier to learn more about that. You can use devdocs.io. So if you want to know more about what all functions that we have in PHP, so let me just go back and see PHP. Okay, I think I disabled it somehow. Okay, I'm going to enable my PHP documentation, and then yes, so now I think my PHP will be working. select documentation, PHP, and then save it. It's downloading documentation from the web. Let's wait for a while so I can show you the different types. Okay, so I'm going to open PHP. You can see that inside PHP I'll just go directly to strings for now. So I'm just going to go down to strings, and here is my strings. So you see there are a lot of functions available, lot of them. The ones that we saw were string to lower, string to upper, converting your strings, and we have substring count, substring. So you will find a lot of them available over here. So it's up to you to actually go through all of them based upon your need, based upon what you need to do. But PHP's library is extensive, so I prefer that you go through this library before actually trying to write your own function. Okay, so this is an exhaustive library of functions that is provided by PHP. So yeah, that's how you write variables in PHP. We just use the $ keyword, the name of the variable equal to the value. Don't declare it, and it doesn't have a data type. Functions, we have to use the keyword function, and then we name of the function, and then the parameters, the body of the function, and then we say we can use return to actually return a value from that function, and then we can call that function from the program. To merge, to concatenate two strings or a variable and a string, we use the dot symbol, the period symbol, or a full stop symbol, as opposed to plus in JavaScript. Okay, and another thing to remember is all your PHP code has to be written between these brackets, between this opening delimiter and this closing delimiter. That's the basics about PHP. That's basic thing you need to know about PHP to write your first program. See you in the next screencast. We're going to talk about loops and conditional statements.